We're going to be recording this webinar today, just so you know, so that this can be viewed in the future. But this is part of our Bike Walk Every Town program. It's our Suburban Advocacy Building program for the Chicagoland suburbs. And the topic today is election advocacy. So we're going to look at how to engage your elected officials and candidates during the election cycle. So if any of you have any questions, there's a little, if you're actually viewing the webinar live on your computer, there's in the bottom left-hand corner, there's a little comment button which you can click, and feel free to type any questions. We'll answer those questions at the end of the webinar. If you're not viewing the webinar live right now but are listening in, you can email me. My name is Maggie, Maggie, and then at activetrans.org. So you can feel free to email me with questions as well. So all right, so just a little background about who we are. We're the Active Transportation Alliance, and we're a nonprofit. We cover the Chicagoland region, and we're here to advocate for walking, biking, and public transit to create healthy, sustainable, equitable communities in our region. And this webinar is thanks to two of our sponsors, UIC and REI, so thank you to them. And now I would like to introduce you to our speaker today. So Kyle Whitehead will be leading this webinar. He is our Government Relations Director at Active Trans, and he has a background in journalism and public affairs and communications. He has his bachelor's in journalism and a master's in public administration. So I will let him take it from here.
Thank you very much, Maggie. Excited to be here today and talk about one of my favorite topics, which is elections advocacy. As a political junkie, it's an exciting time here in the Chicago region. Lots of important elections for our movement over the next couple years. So, of course, in this coming year, we have this year we have the primary election and the general election for governor, and next year there's lots of local elections at the municipal level. So we're going to talk about a process that we use at Active Trans to engage in elections as a 501c3 nonprofit organization, and we find this process works well for us, and it's similar to the process of many of our peer organizations inside and outside the transportation advocacy community across the country. But of course, we would encourage you to talk with people in your community and make sure that this works for you, and kind of customize the approach to your town and your race, which I'll talk a little bit more throughout the presentation about, and happy to answer any questions. But generally, this approach could be applied in any race throughout the region. So these are some overall steps that we'll walk through today. In kind of chronological order here, how you can get started and start thinking about whether it makes sense for you and your group of friends and neighbors to engage in a local election. And then if you make that decision, what additional steps you can take. And some of these will require more time and resources than others. So you might say, hey, I can't pull off a candidate forum, but I can put together an issue platform of 3 to 5 issues and share that with candidates and voters in my town. And that's enough oftentimes to make a difference. One of the benefits of engaging in these sometimes lower profile suburban municipal elections is there's not as many interest groups, there's not as many well-funded groups that are trying to improve awareness and engage in the election. So just a little bit of organizing in with you and your friends and colleagues can really break through and make a difference during the race, and even more important, have an impact on whatever candidate wins the race and will be responsible for implementing your priorities. So the first step, and maybe many of you have already accomplished this, is to get to know your local elected officials. In the transportation world, it can get complicated because every unit of government has some role in decision making and funding around transportation issues, and our focus around biking, walking, and public transit projects. So you really should get familiar with your local, county, state, and federal elected officials. There's lots of free online resources out there. If you don't know what district you're in, or if you're not sure if your district has been changed recently, or if you moved, just double check. Make sure you know what race you should be focusing in on and targeting your messages for. So once you've identified those elected officials at each level of government, get to know what's important to them, not just on transportation, but on all issues, and you want to have a little bit of context as to how they position themselves as a candidate and as an elected official. So an easy way to do that is check out their webpage, both a actual elected official webpage or a campaign page. Oftentimes you'll see issue priorities and be able to glean what they care about most. Sign up for newsletters. Almost everyone has some sort of weekly e-newsletter, or maybe less frequently on a monthly basis. And again, just staying up to date on those newsletters will show you what this elected official cares about and help you customize your message for that target elected official. Even better than doing the online research is showing up in person. You would be surprised about how few people will turn out to some of these public forums or town hall events at the local level, and often it's the same people who show up who the elected official is already familiar with, already knows where they're coming from. So if you could show up, and especially if you could show up with a small group of friends and neighbors who share your issue priorities, that can make a real difference. And often you can get direct access to a candidate. And if you don't see public events coming up, go ahead and call the office and request a meeting. Or even show up, walk into the office one day and talk to a staff person and say you're interested in talking to the member about transportation issues. As long as you're a constituent and the people you're coming with are constituents, they will feel obligated to respond to your concerns and even schedule a meeting, if not directly with the candidate, with staff who's responsible for your issue. Following on social media is another good way to get up to speed on all of your officials. So Facebook, Twitter especially, but some of them even have Instagram accounts, and if they're talking about particular issues and chiming in on transportation, that can help inform your election advocacy steps. And finally, I referenced this a couple times already, but it's important to emphasize, if you have the ability to network with others in your town and form a little bit of an elections advocacy group, whether that's an official bike walk group or some sort of other established organization in your town, that'll certainly help increase awareness of your activities and get the candidates' attention. And I know that many of you have been through our Bike Walk Every Town training, and that's one of the goals of our campaign, is to connect people with others in their community who share their concerns and priorities. So if you'd like help with that, we can certainly help you connect with others in your town and identify a like-minded group that wants to focus on elections advocacy. So the elections calendar, I referenced it in general overall, but you'll want to do some research and determine when exactly your local races are and which races will be most competitive. So in many cases, that will be the first half of 2019 when you'll want to really ramp up your public-facing activities, which means you'll want to start doing the research and getting familiar in 2018, which is why we're doing this webinar today, and hopefully help people get started so that they have everything in place once the races really start to heat up. Now, choosing where to engage can sometimes be tricky. Oftentimes people like to or think they'd want to engage in the most high-profile race for their local congressperson or the governor's race or even the president. But obviously there's challenges to engaging in those highly competitive, high-profile races where really well-funded interests will be looking to make a play. And so much of transportation decision-making is local. So even if the money is coming from the state or federal government, as it often is, they need sign-off and participation from the local municipal government. And the local municipal government really needs to advocate for themselves and identify funding opportunities and secure that state and federal funding. And if they're not doing that on the ground, then it really doesn't make a difference what's happening at the state and federal level. There's not going to be resources in play to advance your cause. So we really recommend, engaging in your local race at the city, township level, because that's where you can most likely make an impact and where a lot of the transportation decisions are made. But again, discuss that with your group and figure out, maybe your local race isn't competitive, but you see lots of opportunity in an upcoming congressional primary. And then it might make sense for you. And that's something we can help with too. Reach out to Maggie, reach out to me if you'd like some additional insight. So you've identified what race you want to play in, and you're figuring out what you care about most. So this is where you're developing an issue platform. We really recommend keeping it to three to five positions about local transportation issues. Maggie has a template for suburban elections, which she can answer some questions about and maybe walk through a little later on. It's available on the Bike Walk Everytown website, so you can see what a platform and later on a candidate questionnaire might look like. But you want those 3 to 5 issues to be of local significance, obviously. So, making it specific to the local context is really important. If you don't have a bike network currently, you want to be specific about where you think there's opportunity to start building a bike network. Maybe you have the early stages of a bike network, but you want to fill in some important gaps, and you want to call that out in your platform. Be as specific as possible so that you can hold elected officials accountable. As you're selecting your issues, try to focus on multiple modes of transportation. We love bikes here at Active Trans. Lots of our supporters love bikes too, but our mission is biking, walking, and public transit for a reason. And one of those reasons is that it helps us increase our political capital and increase our awareness among a broader constituency. Still, despite all the progress that's been made in the region over the last several years, it's still a very small portion of people who are riding bikes. And there's a ceiling for that group. So you want to be able to expand and include people who are walking and riding public transit and even driving. We know the safety benefits to all users from many of the infrastructure that we advocate for, so that you can, really resonate with as wide a group as possible. And just as importantly, the elected official notes that, there's lots of constituents who share your concern, rather than being able to put you in a niche bike corner of the broader spectrum. So once you've identified those issues, again, kind of make a reference check. Does the elected official who's running in this race really have the ability to affect change on this issue? So you don't want to be developing issues and eventually asking questions that person is not directly responsible for. So, an obvious example would be, you don't want to ask about their position on a federal transportation bill if it's a local race that you're engaging in, because, he or she might have an opinion, and that might inform you a little bit about what they, where their priorities stand. But ultimately, if they get elected, that's not something they're going to be able to vote up or down on. If it was a congressional race you're engaging in, then obviously that reality would change. But make sure that the issues and the questions you're asking fall under this elected officials and these candidates' potential powers. And that's something, again, if you'd like help in making that determination, Maggie and our team can certainly help figure that out. So focus on issues of broad appeal. Beyond the mode point that I made a second ago, you want to connect transportation to related issues. We don't just want to improve public transit to make it easier to get around. When you make it easier to get around, what does that mean? Connecting people to jobs, connecting people to educational opportunities, healthcare appointments, and showing the connections between transportation and other related issues. And maybe those related issues are of particular importance in your community. So, for example, for our Chicago municipal elections, we know that jobs and economic development is going to be one of, if not the key issue in the upcoming municipal election. So we really want to emphasize the economic and job access benefits, particularly for low-income communities and communities of color in our platform and questionnaire, because we know that people are paying attention to those issues, and those issues are resonating with elected officials and candidates. So urging specific action on a defined timeline. Again, I referenced that earlier, making sure that you can be as specific and targeted as possible in your ask. So if you're asking them to begin building out a network of safe crossings in your community, choose a target number of crossings and ask them to implement it by the end of their first term. Aim high. You could always walk it back, and you don't even have to. You want your ask to be reasonable, but it doesn't have to be, all that well vetted and researched, because at the end of the day, it's drawing a line in the sand and will be the start of a negotiating point to help frame the questions and issues you care about. Securing support from others, again, once the platform is developed, asking people to sign on and asking organizations to sign on, both traditional and non-traditional allies. So if you can identify people in the public health community in your town, in the economic development community in your town to sign on, often that helps get the attention of elected officials and candidates. Sharing the platform with local media is another thing to increase awareness. So with all the consolidation in the industry, oftentimes there's only one or two publications, most of the time it's online, that are covering these hyper-local issues. So reaching out to a reporter who is probably desperate for content and having them publish a story or two about your platform and your election advocacy can help inform the public, can help get candidates to pay attention, and will pay dividends for your efforts down the road. We have some sample platforms on the Bike Walk Everytown website. The Active Trans and our partners are currently developing a gubernatorial platform, which we'll release before the primary election in March, and use it to carry through to the general election in November. So stay tuned for that, and we'll post it on the Bike Walk Everytown website and share it directly with you when it's available. But in the meantime, check out that local suburban election platform, which is probably most relevant to you, and look at the issues we identified as potential to be included on your platforms and questionnaires, and talk with Maggie and talk with people in your town to make it specific. And later on, if we have time, Maggie can go into a little bit more detail about why we chose those issues and why we think they might be appropriate to target in your town. So once the platform is complete, the candidate questionnaire very directly flows from that platform. So you want to pull 6 to 8 questions from that platform and develop a questionnaire to get candidates on the record in support or opposition to your priorities. These questions should be succinct and clear, just like the platform, so that there's no opportunity for candidates, elected officials to hedge and avoid answering your question and avoid taking a position. So what we like to do at Active Trans, and this is a common technique in 501c3 nonprofit elections advocacy, is include a yes or no question, but leave the opportunity for the candidate to provide comments. So if you're forcing them to say yes or no, you can try to get them on the record in support or in opposition, and then you give them the open-ended opportunity to expand upon their response. If they choose to do that, great. If not, at least you have their support or opposition on your issue. So once the questionnaire is developed, again, stemming right from your platform, you want to get it out to candidates and give them ample opportunity to review it and have their staff review it and submit your responses. So we like to give at least 3 weeks for candidates to review the questionnaire, review your issue platform, and get responses back to you. And then we like to publish those responses at least 2 weeks before Election Day so that voters have enough time to review the candidates' responses and choose how it is or is not going to affect their decision on Election Day. So, work backwards from Election Day, develop that timeline for your group, and then, try to really stick to those deadlines to make sure that, you're maximizing the impact of all of your efforts. As a 501c3 nonprofit, we are required to publish and share any responses we get and publish those responses in full without commenting on or endorsing any particular response or any particular candidate. Now, many of you may not be, affiliated directly or have your own 501c3, so you might not face these restrictions. But we would really encourage you to follow these steps because we think that they'll help, make you most effective and broaden your appeal across parties to all candidates. You might think it's appropriate, or you might determine that it's appropriate after talking to your friends and neighbors that you could endorse a candidate and be more vocal in judging particular responses, and maybe that makes sense in a town for a set of local reasons. But generally, we would encourage you to stick to the kind of inform and educate approach. So you get those responses and make those responses available in full so that people can judge for themselves and choose how it's going to affect their voting decisions. Once the responses are in, or even as the responses are being developed, if you have the time and the resources, you could request meetings with candidates directly to talk about their issues. Or even host a forum at a local park district facility or a village town hall or a library, and invite the candidates to show up and talk about your issues. Ideally, you want to have more than one candidate there, but it's as long as you're inviting everybody, not everybody necessarily has to turn out for it to be worthwhile. Maybe they'll send somebody in their place, and it could help start a local conversation. But that's obviously something that will take a little bit more planning and potentially a little bit of funding for you to pull off. So it might not be appropriate for every town and every race, but it's something to kind of keep in the toolkit to consider if you are able to have the time and resources to pull it off. Once the race is over, that transition period is really important. So a candidate has won the election. You've put all this time and effort into informing the candidate, informing the public about your priorities, and there's 6 to 8 weeks before that candidate takes office, and they're starting to set their agenda. So you want to follow up with them and their staff and remind them that you and your friends and neighbors put all this time and effort into engaging in the race, and you want to make sure that this candidate follows through on any commitments they made during the election cycle. So that might be meeting directly with the candidate. More often, it might be meeting directly with a staff member who's responsible for transportation and infrastructure. So this might be a chief of staff. In a congressional office, they might have a policy person in charge of infrastructure. But generally, the office that you're reaching out to can make that connection for you and help you identify the right person to talk to. But try to do it as quickly as possible after the race, because once they're in office, there's any number of interest groups that are trying to connect with them and influence them. So the earlier the better, especially if you've been successful in engaging throughout the cycle. You want to make sure that results in positive change once that official takes office. And you can even take the opportunity to try to pin them down more to particular issue priorities. So go back to your questionnaire, go back to their response, and remind them what they promised, and maybe they're even willing to go further now that they've won the race, and will be able to start making decisions on your issues. Then as the candidate takes office, and is conducting business on your issues and any variety of issues, stay in touch. So do all the things we talked about earlier in terms of following on social media, showing up in person at public events, reading those local newsletters, even when they're not focused on transportation, because it gives you really important context on what's important to this elected official and how you can influence them. As key decisions are approaching, so maybe the city budget is being finalized in November, you want to touch base with that elected official or that set of elected officials in the weeks leading up to that budget or a month in advance. So as they're making that decision, you're sharing your priorities, reminding them of commitments they've made in the past, and again, making sure that they're following through on what they talked about during the election season. And monitoring social media, a really easy way to do that too. And engaging with them. Most of these candidates at the local level are doing their own social media. Maybe they have one staff person who's helping them out. So go ahead and comment on that Facebook post or respond to their tweet, because they're seeing response, and they're seeing that you're taking the extra step to engage with them in this public forum, so they'll feel obligated to get back to you, especially if you've established yourself as a constituent, and even better, a constituent who has the ability to organize and make their presence felt come election time, because if every politician very quickly starts thinking about getting reelected after they take office. We have a bunch of resources that we've linked on our Bike Walk Everytown website, and you see in front of you here. If people weren't able to make this webinar today, you can direct them to these resources. We'll also have a recording of this webinar available online for you to send around to people in your community. And then, of course, Maggie and myself are always available to answer questions, potentially, have phone calls and attend meetings to answer your questions and help you target these strategies to have the greatest impact in your community. And the most basic level of election advocacy is making sure you're registered to vote, making sure the people around you are registered to vote, and turning out on election day. So many of these races at the local level don't have high turnout, especially in non-presidential years. So a few dozen, a few hundred votes could determine the difference. So that, many of you, I'm sure, have a network of people and access to a couple dozen people can turn a race. So make sure those people know issues you care about, make sure they're registered to vote, make sure they're going to turn out on election day, because that's, the ultimate impact of all the steps you're taking leading up to the date. So really thank you for jumping on the phone today. I know we have some time left to answer any questions you have, and Maggie is also available to help dive into the Suburban election platform template that we have developed, um, if time allows. But first, we'll see if anybody has any questions.
And if you do have questions, there's that little comment bubble in the lower left-hand corner. If you're watching the webinar through Skype, you can type in a comment or a question. You can also email me right now. I've got my phone out so I can check my email if any questions come through. And then also just to announce our next webinar is scheduled for February 28th, which is a Wednesday, and we're going to do another lunchtime webinar, but we'll of course record it for those who can't make it live. And we'll be focused on communications and putting together your messaging and looking into how do you develop an elevator pitch. So we'd love to have you join us for that. And we'll wait maybe another minute to see if anyone has any questions. And then if not, I can briefly go through some of our Bike Walk Every Town um, policy ideas that we think are important for communities to have in place in order to improve biking, walking, and transit. So we do have one question. So Kyle, we've got, where's the best place to view the ballot for my local election?
Great question. If the easiest place to do that is generally looking at the County Board of Elections in your county. So many of you may be in Cook County, but all the other counties as well have their local boards of elections, and they should have all the information about timing of races, and once there are declared candidates that will appear on the ballot, and then as election day approaches, seeing a sample ballot and what it will look like. If you're having trouble going through the county, always check out your town or village website. And if you're still stuck or you're not seeing information posted and made available in a timely manner, pick up the phone, call the county clerk or call your town office, and ask them if it's available, and if not, when it will be available. When we've done some election advocacy, that's something we had success with in suburban towns, because not as many people are monitoring and paying attention. So there's fewer staff that are available to make all this information public. But if you can flag it for them, they'll do the best they can to get it to you.
Okay, great. Thanks, Kyle. So I'll go briefly over some of the our Bike Walk Every Town policy platform, but feel free as I'm going through that, if you have any other questions for Kyle, feel free to type something in the comment box or email me. So let's see. So our first platform policy that we think is very important for every community in the region to have is a complete streets policy, which is the idea of a street should be built for everyone in mind, not only people driving, but also people walking, people biking, people using transit. So asking your local official, if you do not have a complete streets policy, asking them if they would commit to adopting a complete streets policy. And then also, if you do have a complete streets policy, ask them to commit to implementing it. So that is our first platform policy. We also think having an active transportation plan is very important. So that plan maps out where the bike lanes should go, where the sidewalks should be connected, where the trails should be connected. And we kind of split this policy platform into two categories. So we've got, this is more of a focus on biking and trails, but having your elected official or the candidates to commit to developing an active transportation plan if you don't have one, and then prioritizing the implementation of that bike network and that trail network. And if you do have that active transportation plan, you know that's great, but it's good to have that updated every 5 years because things change. So you can adopt these platforms, as Kyle was saying, to what makes most sense for your community. So in addition to focusing on the bike network, also really zooming in on the creating a more walkable community and looking at the safety, prioritizing safety improvements around dangerous intersections and establishing some policy language that eliminates traffic fatalities. Next, we think it's important to have candidates commit to allocating funding towards biking and walking projects. Often this is not the case, and as Kyle mentioned, you can get really specific. You could say we want 2% of transportation funds to go to biking and walking projects. And some Chicagoland communities have done this, but it would be great to see more. And then also having a commitment towards funding transit, because as we know in the suburban communities, things are more spread out. Transit is often a better option for getting people longer distances. So also asking elected officials and candidates to commit to funding transportation and also supporting its continual maintenance and expansion. And then finally, this is the last one, having your elected official commit to establishing a bicycle and pedestrian advisory council. So that council is very helpful in kind of being a watchdog for village staff, for elected officials, to make sure that all of those plans and ideas and promises to improve biking, walking, and transit are actually implemented. And there's some really great examples of advisory councils around the region that have done a lot for improving active transportation. So making sure, asking those candidates to commit to having that and having staff involved is a good ask. So those are the platform ideas from Bike Walk Everytown, and we'll again link to the document so you have that all in writing, and then we have a questionnaire kind of based on these platform ideas, and we'll send you a few different examples so you can kind of pick and choose what works best for your community, but those are our recommendations. So I think, let me just check my email to make sure no one is asking questions. This webinar has been recorded, so we'll get this posted onto YouTube so you can all view it as however works best for your schedule. And then we'll also send you the PowerPoint link and several other resources that were referenced during this presentation. And Kyle, you don't have anything else to add, do you?
No, I look forward to following all your efforts over the next couple years. And yeah, don't hesitate to reach out to Maggie, reach out to me with any questions. It's our job to work with you and help you be more effective in your towns.
Okay, all right. Well, great. Thanks, Kyle, and thanks everyone for joining.